In the world of power, money, and secrets, silence is often more dangerous than words. A single choice, a single betrayal, can turn loyalty into handcuffs and transform a trusted friend into a prisoner. When the night is loud with music and laughter, danger walks quietly in the shadows, waiting for the moment no one sees coming. The empire was never built on kindness. It was built on fear, respect, and the sharp edge of survival. Everyone around the queen knew this truth. They dressed in fine clothes, smiled for the cameras, raised glasses of champagne under glittering lights, but beneath all the glamour was a battlefield. Every man who stood at her side carried his own secrets, his own lies, and his own ambitions. They called themselves the Queen's men, but loyalty in this world was never simple. It was bought, threatened, or borrowed, and at times, it was nothing more than an illusion. The night of the arrest began like any other. The music inside the club was loud enough to drown out doubt, the lights flashing over faces that hid more than they revealed. Money passed hands, drinks poured endlessly, and laughter echoed as if nothing in the world could disturb that moment of celebration. But danger never announces itself. It arrives silently while people are too busy enjoying the illusion of safety. That night was no different. Somewhere in the back of the room, whispers started. A deal was being made, a name being spoken, a promise exchanged in hushed tones. A folder slid across a table, and with it, the fate of one man was sealed. He didn't know it yet, but every step he took, every word he spoke, was being measured by someone who no longer stood on his side. Betrayal doesn't always come with a warning. Sometimes it hides behind a familiar smile and a handshake that feels just a little too firm. The Queen's men were used to tension. They lived with it. They breathed it. But even they didn't see this one coming. The trap had been set days before, maybe weeks. Someone close had been feeding information to the wrong hands, whispering secrets into ears that wore badges instead of crowns. And when secrets mix with ambition, they become weapons sharper than knives. That night, the city seemed alive with two different stories inside the club. Men and women danced under flashing lights, believing the night belonged to them. Outside, in the darkness of parked cars and quiet radios, another story was unfolding. Engines were left running. Officers waited in silence, hands on weapons, eyes on the door. The city held its breath, and the Queen's empire stood unknowingly on the edge of collapse. The man who would be arrested walked through the room like he always did. Confident, untouchable, convinced that his position at the Queen's side made him invincible. He didn't notice the way two men exchanged glances when he passed, or the way a phone buzzed twice before being tucked away. He didn't see the storm forming beyond the walls. In his mind, the night was his to enjoy, another chapter in a story that always ended with him on top. But stories like these rarely end the way their heroes expect. The truth is, power is fragile. One moment you're holding it in your hand, and the next, it slips through your fingers like smoke. On that night, the man laughed too loudly, drank too quickly, and trusted too easily. And while he reveled in the illusion of his own control, the city prepared to remind him just how little of it he truly had. The first sign came quietly, almost unnoticed. The music dipped for just a second, the power flickering in the corner of the room. A glass shattered somewhere, pulling eyes for a moment away from the dance floor. It was nothing unusual, or so they thought. But in the world of the Queen, nothing is ever just an accident. Every small break in the night was a signal. Every silence carried meaning. The air thickened, tension curling itself around the room like invisible smoke. By the time the man realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The silence before disaster is always the loudest. People rarely notice it until it's too late, because silence hides beneath the normal sounds of life. That night, inside the Queen's empire, the silence arrived dressed as routine. The bartender kept pouring, the dancers kept moving, and the crowd kept cheering. Yet, if you looked closely, if you paid attention to the edges of the room instead of the center, you would have seen it, the unnatural calm on the faces of two strangers who didn't belong. The way their eyes followed one man too closely. The way their hands never left their jackets. The man at the center of it all still believed he was untouchable. He laughed with the arrogance of someone who thought betrayal could only happen to others. His confidence was not just a shield, it was a blindfold. Every step he took was measured, rehearsed from years of being in command, but arrogance always leaves cracks. Those cracks don't show until pressure hits, and when it does, the cracks spread fast, swallowing everything whole. He leaned against the polished bar, his voice loud, his grin wider than the truth. People around him laughed at his jokes, some out of loyalty, others out of fear. It didn't matter to him which it was, as long as the sound of laughter covered the doubt rising in his own chest. Because somewhere deep inside, he had felt something was wrong. The weight of a gaze that lingered too long. The rhythm of the music feeling a beat off. The faint static of radios from outside, just barely audible if you listen carefully. His instincts tried to warn him, but pride is louder than instinct, and pride told him he was safe. But outside, the city prepared to strike. Cars lined up in the shadows. Radios crackled in hushed codes, voices calm but sharp. A team of officers waited for the signal, every second stretching into forever. Their eyes were locked on the glowing entrance of the club, a door that would soon swing open not for celebration, but for capture. The city's heartbeat quickened, though no one could hear it yet. Back inside, the queen herself had not arrived, but her shadow was everywhere. The empire she had built was too large, too powerful, for her to be in every room, yet her influence lingered like perfume. Men carried themselves differently when her name was spoken. They obeyed without hesitation when her orders were mentioned. And tonight, her absence made the tension sharper. Who had betrayed her? Who had whispered to the law? Was the arrest about to take her enemy or her own soldier? The man who would be taken did not yet realize that his every movement was being watched by eyes colder than steel. He raised his glass one more time, unaware it might be the last drink of his freedom. Around him, the crowd roared with energy, unaware of the storm about to rip through the room. That's the cruelty of betrayal. It doesn't only crush the one betrayed. It shakes everyone who stood too close. And then, the silence broke. It began with the sudden slam of doors, the music cut off mid-beat, and the sharp command of voices that did not belong in a nightclub. The glow of flashing lights spilled across the walls, drowning the golden shine of the chandeliers. Panic spread faster than the sound. People froze for half a second, their minds racing to make sense of what was happening. And then chaos erupted. Glasses fell, chairs overturned, and bodies rushed in every direction, searching for escape. In the middle of the storm stood the man, confusion painted across his face. He looked left, then right, trying to understand. It wasn't supposed to be him. It couldn't be him. He was too careful, too protected, too important to fall like this. But the hands that reached for him didn't hesitate. Cold steel cuffs bit into his wrists before the shock in his mind could turn into words. His body resisted, but resistance meant nothing against trained hands and the weight of the law crashing down at once. The room watched in disbelief. Some faces held relief, others fear. A few even carried a quiet satisfaction, as though they had waited for this moment, prayed for it in silence. Loyalty is fragile, and when a man falls, it's easy for those who once cheered his name to pretend they never knew him at all. As he was pulled toward the door, his eyes darted across the room, searching desperately for answers. Who betrayed him? Who had whispered his name to the wrong ears? Who had decided tonight was the night he would fall? Every familiar face now looked like an enemy, every ally like a traitor. And the cruelest part was that he would never know, at least not yet. Outside, the night swallowed him. The flashing lights painted his downfall in red and blue, while the city looked on with indifferent silence. Inside, the music never returned. The Queen's men whispered among themselves, their empire shaken, because one truth now echoed louder than the music ever had. If one of them could fall, any of them could be next. The arrest did not end when the doors closed behind him. In truth, that was only the beginning. The silence that followed inside the club was heavier than the chaos that came before it. People stood frozen, unsure whether to whisper or remain quiet. The air felt colder, as if the flashing lights outside had drained all the warmth from the room. Fear hung above them like smoke. Everyone knew that when one man falls, suspicion falls with him. And suspicion is more dangerous than bullets. It kills trust. And once trust is gone, nothing holds an empire together. The queen had not spoken a single word yet, but her absence screamed louder than any command. In her world, silence was not weakness, it was strategy. Everyone inside the club wondered the same thing. Did she already know? Was the arrest part of her plan, or was it an attack against her throne? Those who had left minutes ago now exchanged nervous glances, careful with every movement. A spilled drink, a careless word. Rumors spread quickly, like shadows moving across the floor. Some swore they saw the man take envelopes of money he wasn't supposed to. Others claimed he had been meeting with people who wore suits to clean for this world. But in truth, no one really knew. Betrayal thrives in uncertainty, and the more they speculated, the more the empire fractured. Allies began to look at each other with quiet suspicion. Friends weighed the cost of loyalty against the price of survival. Outside, the arrested man sat in the back of a car, his wrists chained, his mind burning with questions. The siren screamed around him, but he heard something louder, his own heartbeat, pounding in his ears like drums of war. His pride had been shattered, his control stripped away in seconds. He thought of the queen, of the empire, of the knights where power was his to command. Now he wondered if those same allies were the ones who sold him out. The cruelest thought of all crept in quietly. Maybe it wasn't an enemy. Maybe it was someone he trusted, someone whose loyalty he never questioned. He closed his eyes, but the darkness offered no peace. In that darkness, faces flashed before him, brothers, partners, men who had sworn to stand beside him. Each one seemed guilty in his mind. The truth was a poison, and until he found it, it would keep eating him alive. Back at the club, the queen's men tried to hold their ground. They straightened their suits, steadied their hands, pretended control still belonged to them. But the weight of what had just happened pressed down harder than they could admit. The queen's empire had always been built on fear, but tonight, it was fear of each other. Everyone was asking the same unspoken question. If the law could take him, who would they take next? One man poured another drink, his hands trembling just enough to make the glass shake. Another leaned in close to whisper, his words too quiet to hear but sharp enough to cut the air. Across the room, two eyes met briefly before darting away, afraid of what a glance might reveal. Trust was gone, and somewhere, hidden from the noise, the queen watched. She had not moved, had not spoken, but her silence was more dangerous than anger. Those who served her knew one truth: when she was quiet, she was thinking. And when she was thinking, someone's fate was already being decided. The night stretched long, every minute heavy with tension. The celebration had turned into suspicion, the laughter into whispers. The queen's empire had been shaken, and while no one knew exactly who betrayed whom, they all understood one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. Because an arrest is not just about one man losing his freedom. It's about the message it sends. The queen's enemies now knew she could bleed. Her allies now knew she could lose. And her men now knew that loyalty alone might not be enough to survive. The city never truly sleeps, but that night it felt like it held its breath. The news of the arrest spread faster than fire in dry grass. By the time the man sat in a cold room, chained to a chair with light glaring into his eyes, his downfall was already the subject of whispers in every corner of the queen's empire. For some, it was entertainment. For others, it was a warning. For the queen, it was a declaration of war. Inside the interrogation room, time moved differently. The man stared at the blank wall in front of him, his reflection in the glass a reminder of how far he had fallen. Hours passed, or maybe only minutes, he couldn't tell anymore. His thoughts looped endlessly. Who betrayed him? Why now? What would happen next? Each question weighed heavier than the cuffs around his wrists. His pride kept him silent, but silence was a dangerous game. It gave his enemies room to write their own version of the truth. Back in the club, the queen finally appeared. She did not arrive with noise or drama. She arrived with silence, and that silence was terrifying. Her presence turned the room colder than ice. Every man in her circle straightened his back, lowered his voice, and avoided her eyes. She didn't speak at first. She only looked around the room, her gaze sharp, cutting through lies without needing a single word. The weight of her silence forced confessions no one dared to say out loud. Then, she moved toward the table where the whispers had started earlier in the night. Her hand slid across the polished surface, slow and deliberate, before she finally spoke. Her voice was calm, the kind of calm that made men tremble. One of you put him in chains, and one of you will answer for it. The room froze. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Everyone knew the Queen's justice was not delivered by courts or handcuffs. It was delivered in shadows, in silence, in ways that left no trace but fear. Tonight, she was not just searching for a traitor. She was teaching her men that betrayal would never go unanswered. Meanwhile, the arrested men began to break. In the harsh light of the room, stripped of his power, he realized something he had ignored for too long. He was replaceable. The Queen's empire was vast, and while he had been important, he was not the throne. The throne could survive without him. That truth cut deeper than the betrayal. Pride had told him he was untouchable. Reality now told him he was disposable. The officers circling him didn't ask questions, they made statements. They spoke names, dates, secrets they shouldn't have known. Each word dug into him, proving someone close had fed them information. Every denial he gave sounded weaker than the last, every silence heavier than before. And still, the one question echoed in his mind: who? Back at the club, the Queen gave her command. Not shouted, not argued, just whispered. Find out who spoke. And when you do end it, her men nodded, but in their hearts, fear twisted tighter. Because in a room filled with suspicion, anyone could be the next target. The empire was no longer united. It was crumbling from within. And the Queen's silence, her patience, only made it worse. The night ended with two parallel stories. One man chained in a cell, fighting to keep his pride alive, and an empire trembling in shadows, waiting for the Queen's next move. Both sides knew the same truth: this was not the end. This was the beginning of something darker. As dawn broke, the city carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars honked, markets opened, people lived their ordinary lives. But beneath the surface, in the hidden corners where power ruled, everything had changed. The Queen's men no longer trusted each other. The arrested man no longer trusted himself. And the Queen, watching it all, prepared for her next strike. Because the crown is never safe. The moment you wear it, the world begins plotting how to take it from you. And on this night, one arrest reminded everyone that the Queen's empire was not built on loyalty alone. It was built on fear, and fear had just been reignited. The screen fades to black. A single line remains, like a whisper meant only for those who dare to listen. An empire shaken, a queen betrayed, and a war about to begin.